Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride.
Mr. Speaker, at the last budget, the Right Honourable Lady said that she would bring stability to the public finances. Stability to the public finances. But this statement, more appropriately referred to as an emergency budget, has brought her to a cold, hard...
Can I just say to you, quite rightly, I want to hear to the Chancellor. I now want to hear the Shadow Chancellor. I don't need any help.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This emergency budget, Mr. Speaker, has brought the Right Honourable Lady to a cold, hard reckoning. She has become very fond recently to talk about the world having changed. Well, indeed it has, Mr. Speaker. This country was growing at the fastest rate in the G7 only about a year ago. And just as the OECD and the Bank of England and other forecasters, and now we learn today the OBR have stated, growth has been halved in this year, cut in two as a consequence of the decisions and the choices that the Right Honourable Lady made on her watch. Inflation, which was down to 2%, bang on target on the very day of the last general election under a Conservative government. We are now told this year will be running at twice the level as was forecast under ourselves in 2024. This is going to mean prices bearing down on households and on businesses right across the country because of her choices. And the OBR also says, Mr. Speaker, that unemployment will be rising this year and next year and the year after. And in fact, across the forecast period, it will not decline at all. So much for the Right Honourable Lady's back-to-work plans. And we have already seen, Mr. Speaker, what it means when it comes to controlling borrowing under this Chancellor. And yes, she has come forward now with a plan to squeeze spending later on in the forecast period. And she has, of course, told the OBR that these are the elements of spending restraint to which she will stick. But what do the markets think? And could I ask the Right Honourable Lady, given her track record, given the fact that she has failed to control spending and borrowing to date, what does she think the markets are going to make of her latest promises? But the Right Honourable Lady, Mr. Speaker, says, of course, that none of this is her fault. It is the war in Ukraine. It is President Trump. It is tariffs. It is President Putin. It is the Conservatives. It is her legacy. It is anybody but her. Well, what the British people know, Mr. Speaker, is that this is a consequence of her choices. She is the architect of her own misfortune. It was the Right Honourable Lady, Mr. Speaker, who talked down the economy, so that business surveys and confidence crashed through the floor. It was the Right Honourable Lady who confected the £22 billion black hole. A smokescreen that was only ever there in order to cover up for the fact that she and the Prime Minister reneged on their promises to the British people during the last general election. And a black hole that the OBR themselves, ironically at the government's behest, have said they will not legitimise. She chose to be reckless with a sliver of headroom against her fiddled targets. She borrowed and spent and taxed like it was the 1970s. Little wonder, Mr. Speaker, that the Chancellor has tanked the economy. Little wonder we have an emergency budget, all because of her choices. Now, the Chancellor likes to tour the television studios and tell everybody they should be thankful that she will not be ramping up taxes in this emergency budget as she did before. But that will be cold comfort to the millions up and down the country waiting in fear and trepidation for the start of the new tax year. buckling under the burden of tax that will be rising to the highest tax burden on her watch in the history of our country. And so could I ask the Right Honourable Lady if, when she replies in a moment, she will give that much-needed reassurance, particularly to businesses, that she will not be ramping up taxes still further in the autumn. Even a basic economist, Mr. Speaker, knows that if you tax something, you get less of it. You don't need to have worked at the Bank of England for 10 years, Mr. Speaker, to know that. So what did the Chancellor tax? She taxed jobs and wealth creation. She's destroyed livelihoods, businesses clobbered, big and small companies, the backbone of our economy. Enterprise crushed on the altar of her ineptitude. The CIPD telling us a third of those businesses affected will shed labour. Morrison's losing 200 jobs, Tesco 400, Sainsbury's 3,000 jobs lost. No wonder the Federation of Small Business say that outside of the pandemic, business confidence has been left at its lowest level on record. But it's not just businesses, Mr. Speaker. It's charities, it's GPs, it's pharmacists, it's those who transport children who have special educational needs, and it is hospices caring for the sick and the dying. In this House, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party had the opportunity yesterday and last week to stop that, but they voted our amendments down. And we will never let their constituents forget it. Mr. Speaker, if you ramp up taxes, if you ramp up borrowing and spending without any commensurate improvement in productivity, it leads to growing inflation. And inflation has been increasing on this government's watch. It means that interest rates stay higher for longer. The Chancellor just now trumpeted the fact that there had been 3 interest rate cuts since the Labour Party came to office. She knows full well there should have been more than that had she managed. She knows full well. She knows full well. She knows full well, Mr. Speaker. She knows full well that interest rates are higher for longer because of the choices that she took. And this has led, Mr. Speaker, to servicing costs for our national debt, which is running at twice the defence budget. And today we have learned from the OBR that debt interest is to increase still further. None of this money, Mr. Speaker, is going to be spent on public services. It will be going down the drain. Mr. Speaker, the real black hole, Mr. Speaker, the real black hole is not the one the Chancellor invented, it is the one the Chancellor created. It's not a central problem, Mr. Speaker, the fact that this Chancellor is a gambler. Even with her fiddled fiscal targets, she left way too little headroom. Way too little headroom. And it's not the truth that whilst the Right Honourable Lady said at the last budget that that was a once-in-a-Parliament reset, she rolled the dice on a wafer-thin margin, and she lost. Reckless with her fingers crossed, she fiddled the targets and she missed them.
I'm not sure about the language we use. I think there are better words and more constructive words the Shadow Chancellor would prefer to use.
Can I just point out, thank you, Mr. Can I just point out that all of her fiscal headroom disappeared, not just some of it. In fact, she went underwater to the tune of £4.1 billion. Mr. Speaker, reeling from one fiscal event to the next is not a way to run the public finances. And breaking your fiscal rules to the extent that the Right Honourable Lady has in just 6 months is a public humiliation. Mr. Speaker, could I briefly focus on defence spending? We on this side of the House welcome the fact that, as we press the government to do, they will they will reach 2.5% of GDP by 2027. And we note the stepping stone along the way that the Right Honourable Lady has just announced. But we should go further than that. The 3% target should be brought forward to this Parliament. So can I ask the Right Honourable Lady, given the geopolitical tensions that she has raised, what provision has she made in her headroom, in her fiscal plans, for increasing defence spending more quickly in this Parliament if that proves necessary? And could I ask her, would she scrap the absurd Chagos deal and put that money behind our armed forces? Mr. Speaker, the economy is in a perilous state, but there was a different way. There were different choices on taxing and spending and borrowing and on productivity and on welfare. And let me just say a few words on welfare. It was the privilege of my life, Mr. Speaker, to have served as the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. And when it came to welfare reform, with that privilege came a deep responsibility. The responsibility for welfare reform to be properly thought through with a very clear plan. So I know they don't like it because it's an alien idea, Mr. Speaker, to the party opposite. So that we can be fair to the taxpayer, but equally fair to the many people up and down our country, some of whom are highly vulnerable. This was an approach on our watch that led to $5 billion of savings across the forecast period and 450,000 fewer people going on to long-term sickness and disability benefits as a direct consequence. And we would have gone further, much further, and we set out a clear plan. We set out a clear plan in our manifesto to do exactly that. But the party opposite rushed their changes. They had no plan. There was not a single mention of PIP, personal independence payments, in the Labour Party manifesto. When they got into office, they pussyfooted around and dithered. Why? Because it's deeply divisive within their rank and file. And then suddenly, when the Chancellor decided that she had run out of money, out the word went to find some savings in welfare, to scrabble around, to yank every lever possible. And the spectacle, frankly, Mr. Speaker, of what the OBR has said about the changes that were only announced last week by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions is simply shambolic. Yeah. We have gone from incompetence, Mr. Speaker, to chaos. There have been more changes in this policy than there were at the last minute to the profile of the Right Honourable Lady on LinkedIn. The result is the worst of all worlds, a wholly inadequate level of savings on welfare, with welfare costs still spiralling ever higher, and changes that were likely to harm many vulnerable people. So could I ask the Right Honourable Lady, when the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions came to the House last week with these changes, she did not provide an impact assessment. Was this because the OBR had not signed off the numbers? Was it because the department did not have enough time to produce one? Or was it only provided today, as many of us suspect, because this was thought to be a good time to bury bad news? Mr. Speaker, the forecast for growth is down, for borrowing costs is up, for inflation is up, and business confidence has been smashed in a million pieces. This Chancellor constantly trying to blame forces beyond her control. The right response is not to duck responsibility, but to build a resilient economy. The Right Honourable Lady would have us believe that that is what she is doing. But how can we believe this Chancellor? How can we trust this Chancellor? She is the Chancellor who said she would not increase borrowing, but she did. She said she wouldn't change her fiscal rules, but she did. She said she wouldn't put up national insurance, but she did. She said she wouldn't cut winter fuel payment, but she did. She said she wouldn't tax farmers, but she did. And she said she would not move to more than one fiscal event a year, and she just has. And now we are all paying the price of her broken promises. Today's numbers confirm it. We are poorer and we are weaker. To govern, Mr. Speaker, is to choose, and this Chancellor has made all the wrong choices.
Chancellor